Good evening, everybody. I'm Jim Scanlon. I'm the superintendent for the Westchester Area School District. Thanks so much for coming out this evening to hear information about equity and assessment as it's taking place in our school district. Certainly a big topic these past couple of years, and seems to be getting a lot of national recognition. I'll tell you that equity and assessment are not new to the Westchester Area School District, and we'll talk a little bit about our journey and our history and our work with equity. In fact, I will tell you that our district is recognized in the region for the past 14 years as a leader with it in its equity work and its fight to close the achievement gap for students. We will be joined tonight with our assistant superintendent, Dr. Robert Sokolowski, soon to be our superintendent of schools. Was elected by the board last board meeting as he'll be transitioning over the summer. Dr. Tammy Florio, our Director of Teaching and Learning. We have our Director of Pupil Services, Dr. Leanne Ranieri, and we'll be introducing tonight our Director of Equity and Assessment, Ms. Dawn Matter, and she'll be presenting some information tonight as well. So let me just talk a little bit about our 12 years of our formal equity journey in the district. We have on our website an entire section called Equity Mission, which tells the story of work that we've been doing for the past 14 years. We are somewhat of a diverse school district, and our diversity has changed a lot. Go back about 25 years, where our student population was about 19% Black. We are now at about 4.5% of our student body is Black. 74% of our student body is white. We have about 8% Latino, about 8% Asian Pacific Islander, and we also have about 2% students identify as multiracial. So we have seen changing demographics over the last 20 years in the school district, and our equity work adjusts accordingly as we're doing that work. We've been members of the Delaware Valley Consortium for Equity and Excellence out of the University of Pennsylvania for 16 years. In fact, Westchester was one of the founding school districts. There's about 56 districts, I think, in the tri-state area that are part of that consortium. And we are consistently asked to do presentations and share some of our work with those sister districts in the tri-state area through the consortium at Penn. As I said, we've been considered a leader with our equity work and some of the sustainable professional development that we've been doing with our teachers the past 12 years. And again, if you go to our website, you can see all the work with our journey, where we've been and where we plan to go. So objectives for this evening, I want to go over some of the board goals and how equity goals work with the other board goals in our school board. I'll introduce our new Director of Equity and Assessment, Ms. Dawn Matter, and we'll spend some time to just unpack the meaning of equity in education in the last 17 years and how some of that meaning and that definition is changing, again, as we're going through some different changing times. So here are the board goals, and I think it's important when we talk about equity, not in isolation, because it's got to be working with all of the other goals that we have in our school district. Our school board sets goals every year, and it's a format that we've been using for, I guess, about the last 6 years. In fact, it's been recognized by the Pennsylvania School Boards Association as a model template for goal setting for school boards across the state. We have a student achievement goal, and just to kind of summarize some of the work that we're working on this year, looking at local effectiveness measures to improve student achievement. There's more detail about all of these goals and the history of the goals up on the website under the school board site under board goals, and you can see the measurements over the previous years and the goals that we're working on for this year. There's an accountability goal for the board. The board holds itself accountable. It wants to be ethical and responsible in its work, and there's some action steps each year in accountability. We also have a board engagement section in the goals section for the board, so that they're engaged with improving communications. The communications piece is a fabric throughout all of our goals, administratively, our building level, and our district office level. And the board wants to make sure that we're communicating with our internal people, our staff, as well as our external community with our parents and other community members. We have an equity section, an equity goal, and the board is going to support programs to promote and ensure equity for all students. So that certainly is going to have some impact on accountability, student achievement, innovation, and the fiscal piece as well. And I'll talk about that in just a second. We have an innovation section for goals, and the board each year sets some innovation goals. Out of this came some of the things like dual enrollment the last 5 years with Westchester University, some of the blended learning courses. This is all pre-pandemic. And then certainly innovation, we've had to be innovative the last year with the pandemic learning. And the goals this year are related to the pandemic teaching that we needed to do for this past school year. But there's always an innovation piece in the board goals. And then there's a fiscal responsibility goal. We know that it is very difficult to pay for all of the things that we need. There are federal mandates we've got to pay for. There are some pieces that we want to make sure we pay for back in our comprehensive plan. But we also know there are limited resources. We are dealing with two of the most precious commodities in a community. First and foremost, our students and the children of our parents in our community. And we want to make sure they're safe. We want to make sure they're learning, and we want to make sure that they're engaged. The second most important thing are the tax dollars and the dollars that are paid for by our taxpayers to support all those programs. The board wants to make sure that all of the money is going in a fiscal responsible way to balance our budget without compromising the quality of education for students. And that requires sometimes to make difficult decisions about programs we're going to run and reshifting resources and allocations. So let me talk about the specifics of the equity goal for this year, since tonight is about equity. But again, all of these goals have to work together as a comprehensive school system. So the first goal in the equity out of the equity goal, there was created a director of equity and assessment position. This came out of a report that we did last year. One of the goals in equity last year was to do an outside evaluation of our equity work. And what are the things we're doing well? We wanted to get some outside eyes on the 10 years of work that we've been doing. So we brought in the Delaware Valley Consortium on Equity and Excellence out of University of Pennsylvania to do a comprehensive study of our work. They interviewed community members, they interviewed parents, they interviewed students, they observed classrooms, they looked at our policies, they looked at our goals, they looked at our achievement data. It was a very comprehensive report. And that report too can be found up on our website along with a summary. So one of the recommendations out of there was to create a director of equity and assessment position to give it a little more profile. Our board in 2015 was one of the first school boards in the area to actually create a supervisor of equity and a position, which was also connected with world language. And the supervisor level was sort of a middle management level position. So one of the recommendations was to create this director position that's a direct report to the superintendent to give it a little bit more prominence in the school system. So we did that. The board did that. They reallocated existing resources. We had to eliminate the supervisor position to create the director position. And in fact, when it was all done, the board actually eliminated 6 administrative positions, created 4, including the director of equity assessment, and took some of the additional savings out of that to funnel resources into the classroom. So it wasn't that we added another position into the budget, we reallocated resources because it was now a priority based on some of our goals. The second goal was to support and prioritize the findings in that report as we're looking through that report. 2 things out of that we've seen is looking at curriculum, looking at our curriculum and making sure that we have culturally relevant materials incorporated. This is something that we had started 3 years ago. And as the audit group came in to look at this, they said, you've got to be a little more formal with it. We've got some pockets of excellence going on, but we need to make that more systemic. So that's a curriculum piece that we're looking at as we look at curriculum materials to make sure that we are having available culturally relevant materials for all students to access. And the third goal for this year is the leadership development for our principals and equity team members. We had actually started working with a group out of UCLA and Dr. Tyrone Howard. And we did some of that pre-pandemic last year, kind of to reshape our equity teams, redefine equity. When we started the journey 12 years ago with equity, we were defining equity specifically by race and the color of one's skin. And we specifically did that because it was one of the most noticeable things we could do. The report said you need to look at equity in a bigger, broader scope, which we had started to do that. And we're looking at equity as more of just the color of one's skin, but looking at gender. We're looking at disabilities, looking at race. So there's many more ways to look at equity to make it a broader brush on that. And look at some leadership development with our building principals and our equity teams. We have equity teams. We've had them for about 10 years. Each school has a team of teachers working with their building principal to focus on some equity goals each year. We also have a district level team where we have community members from each of the 16 equity teams, as well as a school board member involved with that as well. So that's a systemic change that we did 10 years ago. And we are trying to take those teams to the next level. And that's some of the recommendations that came out of that report. So those are specific ones for the goals for equity. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our assistant superintendent, Dr. Bob Sokolowski.
Thank you, Jim, and good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for tonight. I'm going to jump in a little bit and talk a little bit about the why. And as you see there, it's expressed, how do we know the Westchester Area School District needs a plan to address equity? And I first would like to start with a term that many of us have heard, and that's the achievement gap. And when we go back to when we started our work with equity, over 15 years ago in the school district, we defined the achievement gap as measuring the success of our African-American students and Hispanic students versus all students. And that is something, whether you're looking at data in the Westchester Area School District, in the region, across the state and nationally, there has historically been an achievement gap. However, when we came to our most recent comprehensive plan and working with the committee, we found that looking at strategies that would support opportunity and access would actually be more effective to closing the achievement gap. And so with the opportunity and access, a lot of the really good work that we've done, as we look at the secondary level, we have with the rigor levels at the high school level, we actually collapsed the lowest level several years ago. And just last year, we worked with the middle school level to realign the levels. And some of that was just simply with the terminology that we had a level 1 and a level 2. And that wasn't quite clear to parents. Was level 1 higher than level 2, or was it vice versa? And so we did work last year with our middle school teachers and administrators to refine that and support better access for our students. And what we have found is that if we support better access, better opportunities for our students, that we will see overall greater student success. The second area in terms of why, Dr. Scanlon just talked about. Last year, we had an equity audit done by a group out of the University of Pennsylvania, the Delaware Valley Consortium of Excellence in Equity. And they came out of that report, and just to talk a little bit about that, there were a team of about 30 external educators, both from K-12, higher ed, that came into the district for a number of days. And they reviewed a lot of data, they reviewed a lot of policies. But one of the most valuable things that they did was they met with about 600 stakeholders in the Westchester Area School District and just had conversations. This consisted of students, parents, administrators, teachers, support staff, and they came out, as Dr. Scanlon said, with some very key findings. One of them was, as Dr. Scanlon mentioned, was to elevate the supervisor of equity to a cabinet level position that would be the director of equity and assessment. And in just a few minutes, I'll introduce Mrs. Dawn Matter, who will talk more about equity in the Westchester Area School District. This group also drove towards finding a variety of feedback from students. And this is something the Westchester Area School District has been pursuing for a number of years. And that is the importance of involving students in the decision-making, getting feedback from students. And it's just so critically important when we're getting the feedback from students. We're looking for all viewpoints. We're looking for all perspectives, all opinions in order to inform the decision-making, in order to inform curriculum, in order to inform assessment in the school district. Lastly, one of the reasons for why is that this equity work has actually been with us nearly 50 years. In the early 1970s with IDEA, we saw IEPs evolved. We saw gifted IEPs and 504 plans. And so we actually are in some ways, we're mandated by the federal government to provide equity, to provide equitable resources for our students. So at this time, I would like to introduce our Director of Equity and Assessment, Mrs. Dawn Matter.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. I know everyone is super busy and we got you right in the midst of dinner time. So I want to thank you guys for coming out tonight to hear us present this information regarding equity and assessment in the Westchester Area School District. Also want to make one quick note that this presentation will be available as well for our Spanish-speaking families on May 20th. So information will be going out about that. So about the Director of Equity and Assessment. Just to give you guys some background about me, I have spent for my career 5 years in mental and behavioral health, which was a great experience as far as getting me ready for the work in public education, having the opportunity to work with families individually, work in families within their houses. And it was a really eye-opening experience as far as priming me for the work in public education. At that point, I did transition into public education, where I started off as a social studies teacher. I was there for about 3 years or so in a unique program, an alternative programs for those kiddos who didn't meet success in those traditional settings. These were the kids who just had it really difficult. It was my job to accelerate them. And also, this was many years ago, I want to say on the brink of 20, where a lot of social emotional learning came to play. So with that, before it became a thing, but really supporting these kids where they were, getting them accelerated, and they met with success in the program. And I also served as a special education teacher. I did learning support. I was also an emotional support teacher at the high school and middle school levels as well. At that point, I did transition to an elementary assistant principal and also a middle school assistant principal for approximately 7 years. And middle school sure is fun. So just having that continuum of elementary to middle school was a great experience where I work with those kids and getting those kids at that really unique middle school level, prime for the next level. I got a lot of congratulatory emails in this position, like, welcome to the district. Well, I'm actually no stranger to the district because I was at Bayard Rustin High School before transitioning into this role as an assistant principal. And I will say that I really love and miss the Rustin community. My work is needed here. However, for those of you who really don't know who I am, you can ask any parent at Bayard Rustin High School, and they will definitely vouch for the work that I've done with their student across gender, across learning differences, across leveling. It's so many different levels across mental health. So ask any Ruskin parent about me and they will definitely endorse. And then finally, I do live in the great community of Westchester. So I'm not someone who, coming into the community, trying to, tell you about your community. No, I live here. I've been here. I'm around. I'm going to be here. So that's in a nutshell, a little bit about me. Okay, so just to kind of, as we roll into the presentation, I want to kind of prime your thought for a couple of things to think about as we go into equity. So just some food for thought. Are you left-handed, or do you know anybody who is left-handed? Think about your experiences in public restrooms. Are the lines usually longer, or are they shorter for women? Are you considered short? So just some things to think about. I actually had a sister who's left-handed, and like everything was so difficult, whether it's going to school, and they had the older desk with the arms on it where they had mostly like the right arm. So if you're writing, it catered to right-handed people. And I remember like her in school having to get like a different desk. And then later on, they started ordering a couple of these left-handed desks or even just scissors, something as basic as scissors. She had a very difficult time cutting because she was left-handed. And so she would say, oh my God, this is like a right-handed world. And so there are some things that are put in place for left-handed people as far as making their experience more optimal. Back to my bathroom example. Oh boy. So we all been through this, right? You know, men go to the bathroom, women go to the bathroom. The women's bathrooms are always longer. Why is that, right? Of course, you know, there's a lot of differences as far as, you know, what that entails. But something that's interesting is that because they noticed that there was a bit of an inequity as far as, equal number of bathrooms, but the women is just taking a whole lot longer because it's just more for us. So as a result, the state saw an inequity, and what did they do? They actually did something about it. So they actually had a law in place where, you know, for every, you know, it's like a 2-for-1 deal, right? So yeah, for every one male bathroom, you get 2 female bathrooms just to address that inequity. Then also, are you considered short? So I can't count the number of times, and you guys probably been through it as well. You go to a supermarket and something's too high on the shelf, or you go to a clothing store and they have like a stick trying to reach the top shelf, or even like mini ladders. So as far as just having the mindset, or you know what, everyone is just equal, not necessarily, because everything in everyday life, things that we don't even think about, is a situation based off of equitable, and we make accommodations to adjust whether you're left-handed, whether you're male, female in the bathroom, or whether or not you have height differences or not. So I just wanted to put that out there. Okay. Understanding equality and equity. So in regards to the definition of equality, and as I'm reading the definition, just kind of take a look at this picture. If we go in and say, you know what, we're going to treat all kids equal. Okay? We're going to treat all kids equal. Here we go. Equality is the premise of, is the premise is about sameness. It promotes fairness and justice by giving everyone the same thing. It only works when everyone starts from the same place. So in looking at this picture, you see the little guy over on the right hand side. He's struggling a bit. However, if we go in and say, you know what, we're going to go ahead and we're going to treat everybody equal, that little guy on the right hand side, he's not seeing or getting what he exactly needs. Now the guy on the left, he has way more than what he needs, right? And so he's okay, right? So when we talk about equity, equity is the premise of fairness, or making sure people get access to the same opportunities. There are instances where differences or history can create barriers to access, so we must ensure equity before we can enjoy equality. So just a visual, the more equitable situation. Again, look at our guy on the right-hand side. You know, he has a little bit more than what, you know, the guy on the end. And we actually took his stool away. But guess what? He still gets to access what he needs. But our little guy on the right, he is getting the same thing as everybody else has here. So this is a very good visual regarding like prepping your minds for the work as it relates to the Westchester Area School District. So just a quick note here is that equity is when every student has what they need to succeed. Just another visual here regarding the analogies that I gave. And even we have a young girl here who has a wheelchair. Guess what? We meet her where we are by where she is by giving her a laptop, etc. So as far as what equity and assessment looks like in our district, there are a whole number of things that we have working simultaneously. And when I'm done speaking here, I'm going to transition to Dr. Florio, who can give us a bigger, I guess, a bigger picture regarding how this works within the scope of our curriculum. So in regards to equity, we have professional learning plans in communities and culturally responsive teaching and learning. So for those of you who may not know what culturally responsive teaching and learning is just making sure that we are really understanding our students, meeting them where they are, and just trying to do the small things in order to make them more comfortable in a learning community. That's what that is. Bias training and also self-reflection. Based off of our data, you know, we're seeing, like as Dr. Sokolowski mentioned, we're seeing some gaps. And regarding these gaps, we want to say, well, we want to make sure that, we have a good number of girls in some of our engineering classes where we're seeing more boys. Um, I get things that at Ruston where, girls would say to me, well, Miss Matter, I feel like that just because I have blonde hair and I have a suntan, that people think that I'm a dumb blonde and I can't do work. And so those type of things, as far as looking at people and then making assumptions and drawing conclusions without looking at a student's ability. So we want to do some more bias training and some more self-reflection just to make sure, just because somebody is blind with a suntan, that we're not automatically putting them somewhere where they don't need to be. And again, it's not intentional. I don't want you to think that teachers are intentionally do this, but this is some training that we have to look at. Everybody has good intentions. Systemically, we're fostering a sense of belonging for all students. Very important when a child goes into a school, and as well as staff, we all want to feel like we belong there. And so we want to really unpack that. Continual professional development and coaching for educators, just coaching on how are we dealing with, diverse learners? How are we incorporating different experiences? How are we making sure that we all are coming from a place of understanding where we have diverse backgrounds, or diverse experiences, and how are these voices being heard in a classroom? Because true learning is knowing about multiple perspectives. So just giving our educators some support for that. Diverse hiring. We just want to make sure that, again, we have an array of diverse experiences, just based off of hearing from some of the conversations that we have with our students, and certain things that they had no idea existed in elementary school, and they get to high school, they're like, whoa. So they want people who are different from them. They want to learn. Not to say that, no one's trying to change, whatever was instilled with them as in the home. We just want diversity. We just want a different experience where we can kind of learn and grow from each other. Okay. Also, relevant curriculum with multiple perspectives, which we just talked about, just differences. Again, let's have a conversation. Why is this different versus this? That's true education takes place when we're having different perspectives. Also, increase access for programming and leveling, which is super duper important as far as making sure, again, have had some things specifically at Ruston where my girls were a couple of things, oh, you know what, having those conversations, maybe you should try this or maybe you should go for that, but really strategically looking at, certain leveling and programming for our kiddos, and then examining additional innovative programming for our diverse learners. We have always done a lot of things in the district regarding niche situations. We're supporting our diverse learners. We have a number of programs that do that. However, we're going to continue that work as far as looking and say, okay, well, where else can we go? What else can we do in regards to program for those diverse learners? And in regards to assessment, of course, there's a lot of things regarding putting these structures in place. But of course, we have to track it and say, hey, what's working, what's not working, et cetera. And that's where the other side comes in, which is assessment. So managing and examining data regarding evaluation systems, again, with the hope of trying to say, all right, well, is this a better opportunity? Is there some access gaps here? Just kind of taking a look at that and trying to tweak it for all learners. Ongoing work to ensure common assessments are accessible to all, fair and equitable, same thing. And there's a whole bunch of tests down there that I'm sure you guys got the emails about that I'm here to look at, help to manage, work with various departments as far as trying to really fairly assess our kiddos and trying to do everything within our power to make sure that everybody has what they need. So there was a lot there. So what I'm going to do right now, as far as just teasing out and breaking down a little bit more as far as equity and assessment with regards to our curriculum or teaching and learning, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Tammy Florio.
Thank you, Ms. Matter. I wanted to share for just a few minutes about our district plan for professional learning. We build in an opportunity for our teachers to design some of their own experiences. They have the chance to self-select goals that they would like to pursue to design some lines of inquiry that are personally meaningful to them. And as you can see, we have 4 main strands or 4 priorities. We have wellness, equity, assessment, and content pedagogy. About half of our teachers, a little over half, selected content pedagogy goals for this year. Now that might be anything that's specific to their content, such as exploring new math resources for students, or how to best teach the health phys ed standards. It could also be an innovative instructional practice. This year, we learned an awful lot about effectively implementing and strategically using technology tools. So that would fall under the realm of content pedagogy. The other 50 some percent, 46% of our teachers was pretty well distributed among equity, assessment, and wellness. Wellness has to do with social emotional learning and the well-being of the care of our students, more to do with how we ensure that those needs are being met, as well as our academic goals. So it's an opportunity to really delve into some of those resources. We have teachers who are pursuing equity and assessment. And I wanted to give you some examples of what those lines of inquiry may look like and how these areas often overlap and intersect. Dawn, can you share the next slide? Thank you. So here you can see that some of our teachers are investigating some content pedagogy strands and questions that are also equity questions. Boys and reading, or girls in math. How can we make sure that regardless of gender, all students are achieving at high levels, that all students have the same access to high levels of classes? We have an example of our EL students, so our English learners. How are we sure that the assessment practices we are using match their language proficiency level? What is it that we're doing to make sure that they have that same opportunity to show what they've learned and to show what they know? And finally, as we make text choices, whether that's in English or social studies or any of our courses, how are we choosing books that make sure all of our students feel safe and feel seen? Our goal is to make sure we're using text as both mirrors and windows so that students see themselves in the books they're reading, and they also see the world around them that may be different. But you see how all of these 4 areas often overlap and allow us to weave together the priorities we have for professional learning and for teaching and learning.
Thank you, Dr. Florio. So just, with that being said, with everything, we put a lot of information out there, how equity, assessments, learning, teaching, wellness is all connected. And I just had a quote up here by Eleanor Roosevelt, who, again, my social studies background, she was First Lady of Franklin Roosevelt for it was 30s. During, I want to say, his administration. Equity is a human rights issue that impacts us all. So she said that the destiny of human rights is in the hands of our citizens in all of our communities. So this was, almost 100 years ago, where Eleanor Roosevelt preferenced human rights and how it's up to us as a community in order to ensure that. So just wanted to note that equity work is an extension of human rights, just to make sure that we are doing whatever we can in order to serve our students' needs and to make sure that we're meeting them where they are, so we can do what we actually say in our mission statement, which is to have all students to achieve their personal best. So with that being said, I just want to bring back Dr. Scanlon to address one of the, when we sent out the invitation for this presentation, there were we had opportunities for questions, and I also see a couple of questions going into the Q&A, which we'll get to a little bit later. But some of the common questions that we've gotten when the email first went out for the presentations, we just decided to kind of put a couple of things of common things that we've heard regarding some of the emails or questions that people may not know or may not understand, or you hear certain things out there and you're not so sure. So we're just going to go ahead and take that time, and we'll navigate through a couple of these inquiries, and then we'll get to the Q&A session. So Dr. Scanlon.
Sure. Yeah, I'll take a first couple here, Dawn. The question about, we hear, will my child be taught equity? Some people have asked me, are you teaching critical race theory to the kids, or why are you teaching critical race theory to the kids? We don't have a course called equity. We don't have a course called critical race theory. It is not a course. It is a philosophical belief that we have been using in our professional development model with our teachers for the past 12 years. So when we look at, we'll get the microaggressions in a little bit. When we look at having these courageous conversations with our teachers about race and what are some of the expectations that take place, not on purpose, but inadvertently, we have to be courageous enough as a staff and a faculty to recognize that, and we have to be courageous enough to recognize when we see some of these inequities taking place to do something about it. So we're not teaching the kids about that. We are working with our staff, and we are demonstrating to our students and to our parents that we want all kids to be successful, and sometimes we have to remove the barriers from making that happen. And that's really the focus of our equity work. Will my child be specifically taught race? No, we don't do that. We do work with our teachers, and we work with our principals and our counselors when we hear racist comments being made to other students from students, and we have to be able to address that. We have pretty strict policies on that in terms of some of the discipline policies, but we also have a restorative piece on that to make it a teachable moment, particularly for younger kids who may not necessarily know what they're saying is offensive to somebody because of the color of their skin, because of their religion, because of whether they're a boy or a girl. So we do sensitivity training with our staff so that they're able to help children recognize when some things are said and they're hurtful to other kids. So we don't have courses called race. We don't have courses called equity, but we do work with our staff so that they can address those things when they come up in the classroom.
Thank you. And then I'm going to go ahead and transition to question number 3. Some certain things, it came up in the emails as far as the work. Well, what is a microaggression? And you guys probably heard some of these things about microaggressions and what that means. So just the official definition of a microaggression is just a statement or an action or incident regarding as an instance or an indirect, subtle, or an unintentional, and I'm going to say this one more time, an unintentional sometimes, it's an act or of discrimination against members of a marginalized group, such as a racial or even like an ethnic minority. So certain things that like microaggressions, they may happen, people may not be aware of. It can marginalize somebody and not make them feel good about themselves. And so basically just trying to have an awareness. Again, I've had different conversations across students' sexual orientation. I had some of my white students come to me about things that happened to them, things regarding religion that made them really feel uncomfortable. So just basically, it's an act that makes somebody feels less than or marginalized. That could happen with a female or anybody else. So we're just trying to, again, this is whole education of a child. Okay, we have superior curriculum, superior education. This is our reputation in Westchester, but there's also holistic as far as making aware of human education of how we talk to people. With that being said, question number 4, we have the next question. I think Dr. Sokolowski, I want to say this on you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. And just as everybody can see there's a question there about somebody shared with us the observation that we do have students who may move from elementary school all the way through graduation, and they may not have an African-American teacher. And the question is, so what are the district's goals around this priority and how are we tracking it? Yes, the district, our board specifically, has adopted goals to increase the number of minority hires. And the purpose there is so that we're hiring a teaching force that is more representative of our student body. One of the pieces that's very important with equity is creating a sense of belonging in school And so it is important for students to be able to see themselves in a teacher. And I think that's critically important towards creating that sense of belonging in our schools. So how do we track that? We actually do post this data. It's included in our board goals results from 1920. You can check that out on the website. We do also have on our equity mission page, we do also include hiring. I would also like to share that across the nation in Pennsylvania, this time it's a shortage of teachers. And if we go back and we look at the number of teachers graduating from teacher prep programs in the current year versus about a decade ago, that number is down about 60%. So hiring teachers, hiring administrators even can be very, very challenging. But our human resources department is very active with their networking with colleges and universities. We are also, as a district, we're advocating for our state legislators to look at the reciprocity agreements that we have with certifications for teachers from other states. Pennsylvania is pretty stringent, and we think that in the coming years that we will be able to have a wider pool of candidates if that reciprocity is relaxed a little bit and not so stringent. The fifth question there, and I had talked about, and Mrs. Matter had talked about, looking at the distribution of students in high-level classes. This is something that we have tracked for a number of years. It's included in our local effectiveness measures. And just an example to share with folks that when we look at the percentage of African-American students and Hispanic students in AP courses, if we look back to the year 17-18, we had about 15% of our students that were African-American and Hispanic taking AP classes. In the current year, this percentage is now up to 23%. So again, by enhancing access, by enhancing high expectations for all students, we're seeing greater overall student achievement here in Westchester. But I would also point out that that 23% is still, the gap still exists between all students of about 21 percentage points. So while we've narrowed the gap is still rather appreciable. And this is one of the reasons why this work in equity is just so important. Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you. So that's at the end of our informational presentation. And hopefully with everything that we've talked about, everything that we presented, which is also on our district website, and that will be updating accordingly once we get to the end of the school year in the midst of this pandemic. But hopefully if you still have any questions, need more clarification, we definitely encourage you to reach out and contact us. There were some questions, I just wanted to say this, that came out that was very individualized for your particular situation. So someone will be in contact with you regarding those questions, but hopefully our goal was to give an overarching view as far as the work that we're doing and we have been doing, as Dr. Scanlon said, for the past 16, 17 years. And just before we get to Dr. Scanlon and our Q&A, I just do want to say that we will have future parent meetings. I know, again, the goal is informational here, just to present information. However, we will have more interactive parent meetings where you'll have an opportunity to engage in some deeper and richer discussions. Thank you.
Chris, I think I know we're trying to answer some of the questions in the Q&A. There are some that we have not gotten to. We can catch those now.
Certainly, Dr. Scanlon. Could you provide examples of the barriers to access that our students face?
Yeah, Dawn, do you want to take that? Give some examples. Do you want?
Yeah, could you
repeat the barriers?
Yeah, could you repeat that again, Chris? I'm so sorry.
Certainly. Could you provide examples of the barriers to access to our students?
Yes, and so basically, I could give just one specific example as far as barriers to access. Just the act of simply not knowing. and not knowing how to navigate the system or knowing what their options are regarding classes and leveling. So I've actually gotten this multiple times where a student was in one level class and said, "Ooh, you know what? I have the option to maybe take a higher level course if I want to. It's not contingent upon a recommendation." I said, "Well, here's the thing. You know, the recommendation is the recommendation. However, if you feel that you really want to give it a shot and take an AP course, you always have that option." So the student was actually surprised to know that, oh my goodness, I actually have the ability to really just speak up and say, "Hey, I want to take an AP course," without being recommended to it. That right there is a barrier regarding access. There's a lot of people who just simply do not know or know how to navigate the system. So I can give many more examples, but hopefully that one thing, as far as just knowledge, even in regards to a family with an IEP, they may not know, certain things regarding just accesses, what programming is available. It's a lot of small things that people simply don't know, which is also one of our goals as far as putting more information out there. Just a quick, any kind of reminder for parents, just a knowledge base to say, "Hey, here are some things that you may not know that are out there and it's available to you."
Oh, and I'll give another one too that kind of bleeds into the community and is a non-academic one, but having kids involved with some of our sports programs. A couple of years ago, one of our administrators did his dissertation doctoral work in the whole idea of equitable access to our sports programs and why some kids in the high school weren't participating in some of the teams. And he was looking at particularly some of our low income kids. And when he started teasing out and talking to those families about going back and doing the history, it goes back to not being able to afford the participation in Little League way before they got to high school, where they're running some of the Little Leagues and not having access to some of those sports programs at younger ages, where everybody that did have that got a little bit of a faster approach in terms of learning the skills. So that really caused us to reach out to the community and some of our sports teams, because we have some wonderful sports leagues. And if they're just not aware of these families that just can't afford it, because they're very proud, they're not going to say they can't do that. That's when it makes a better connection between the community and the school to try to remove that barrier early on so that kids can continue on to those upper level high school sports programs. But that was something that he found out in that research, doing some long-term dialogue with some of those families.
Thank you, Dr. Scanlon. Our next question. How are children taught to recognize and report any incident that may occur where they do not feel safe or seen?
We have safe spaces set up in our schools. This is some of the work that is done by our guidance counselors. This is work that is done by our equity teams. We've had events that have happened around the country where we have set up spaces for kids to come in and speak, and our staff too, for that matter, to speak. In fact, Dawn's done a couple of them this year for staff after school, to have a safe space to talk about concerns they might have about something that may have happened or is about to happen in our community or around the country. So we have done that. That is part of the work of our building equity teams, and as part of our district equity teams as well.
Next question. What about students having equitable access to the arts and music as well as traditional academic subjects?
I'll take that, Chris. And that is a really good question. And that's something that I've studied at a lot of very successful high schools. One of the things that you can look at is a very robust music and art program where students have that opportunity to express their passions through the arts. And that is something actually that we do measure in our local effectiveness measures. We do disaggregate the students who are participating in art and music courses. Another example of that, we also do take a look at students who are involved in computer science and CAD courses. And one of the reasons why we look at that area is because that's an area where oftentimes minorities are underrepresented in that field. There was also a question that came up about why do we consider gender? And we do see what I would term some perhaps implicit bias in terms of recommendations for male and female students. And an example with this would be, I shared with our board back in August or September, that we look at boys versus girls at the high school level who are accessing computer science and AP math, that ratio of boys to girls is 4 to 1. And I think that it's important for us to demonstrate for all of our students that they can have access to whatever course, whatever passion, whatever career path that they choose.
Thank you, Dr. Sokolowski. Our next question. I believe African Americans make up 13% of the overall US population. Are students exposed to Asian teachers or Indian teachers? And will this also meet your equity objectives?
Yeah, if I may jump in, just to clarify that, diverse means diverse. So when you talk about Asians or Indians, Hispanic hires, that's under the diversity umbrella. So I'm not sure if that person thought that diverse just meant one thing, but diverse is diverse. So we're looking at not only diversity from as well the ethnic standpoint, but we're also looking at experience diversity. Okay, so I just want to throw that out there, that yes to all of that. And so if you grew up in a very poor situation and you're a white person, that's also a diverse experience. So I just wanted to just clarify the definition of what diverse actually means. Thank you.
Thank you. Summarizing a question that came in, can Westchester describe anything we are doing with the universal design for learning at this time?
I am not familiar with that program. We are not formally doing anything with that. We may have some teachers, maybe some building equity teams are doing some things at the building level, but we're not formally in our district.
Thank you, Dr. Scanlon. Any of the members of our panelists would like to clarify or add in about any of the questions that were answered? We did mention that some of the questions submitted contained private or sensitive information, and we do have a record of that, and someone will be reaching out to those people who submitted questions. So if your question was not answered live tonight on this session, we will be reaching out to you for continuing this conversation.
Yeah, and if I actually wanted to answer a question that was someone put out a microaggression against a marginalized group as being one-sided. So what I was reading was the official dictionary definition. So for a person had wrote, as far as being mindful of examples that I'm providing, I did preface this by saying that I do get comments, in case you missed it, from students who are, blonde hair to the suntan, and people will say, oh, you're a dumb blonde. And so that right there is another example of a microaggression that's not necessarily against a marginalized group. And I also talked about some of my students where they struggle. I mean, I get another example where he said, Miss Matter, somebody made a comment about me being a white boy. And that hurt me just because I'm white in my white skin. I like my white skin. I say, and you should. So just to clarify that for the person who made that comment, the definition dictionary was from a marginalized group. However, I gave examples of other people or white children who experienced this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Matter. I'm scanning through some of our questions, and as I did mention, we will be following up. We're coming up on the end of our presentation, and wanted to make sure that Dr. Scanlon had the opportunity to wrap up for today.
Sure. Thanks, Chris, and thanks everybody for coming out. just a couple of comments. Someone mentioned something about civil rights in there, and yes, there was civil rights in their Civil Rights Act, and people are protected. That doesn't necessarily mean that people are following that. That doesn't necessarily mean that that we just ignore things when things happen. So we are well aware of that, and we certainly are following all the civil rights regulations in our school system. With regard to the staffing piece, we're trying to recruit and retain different people of color in our school system. It's important for our kids to see different people in their classrooms. It is hard because there's only about 92%, I think, across the state. 92% of all of the educators in the state of Pennsylvania are white, and the higher education system is not really putting out too many people of color. There's very few Latino. There are more African American candidates that we're seeing, but not nearly the numbers that we'd like to see in terms of a candidate pool. When you talk about Asian or Latino, very few in going into public education. When we've reached out to some organizations that try to promote particularly Latino and African American students into colleges, they're hesitant to go into teaching because they can actually make a lot more money in some of the math and science fields. So we're seeing that happen. So it's very difficult. So if we can't get people of color in our classrooms, it's important for the white people in our classrooms to understand and recognize different cultures, because I think being culturally relevant and culturally aware is very critically important. And that's the work that we've been doing and the staff development that we've been doing. And as I said, we've been recognized around the region for the work that we've done. So we will continue on our journey. We will continue with our goals to make sure that all students are successful, to remove barriers, to help students become successful, to reach out and work with this wonderful Westchester community in all of these areas. Again, our goal and our mission is to have each individual child achieve his or her personal best. And we will continue with that mission, and we will do that one student at a time. So thanks for coming out tonight, hearing our story and our work so far with equity. This is a journey that will continue. It's not easy work, but at the end of the day, it's all good for all kids. So thanks again for coming out. If you have other questions, please reach out to any of us, our building principals, any of us in the district office, and we're very happy to talk about any of our programs here in the school district. So thanks again. Have a great night, everybody, and please be safe.